have in front of you here is our marking matrix. It's what we use to give you feedback on your mock exams. Now, even if you're not doing any mock exams, this is a useful video for you, but I would really urge you to do this. Of course, if you're on one of our courses, they get included in the course fee. If you're just watching this as a tuition video, there's still some really good lessons to learn from this feedback sheet. So it's definitely worth you watching even if you're not going to do that. But to me, if there was one thing that I would say was the most important thing for anyone in passing the case study exams, it would be to do mock exams and aim to improve from each mock to the next mock to the next mock. The reason is that usually the first mock that I see when I'm marking someone's script, well, it's usually a fail. It's just that people need to get themselves into the mindset. You could have gone through all the tuition videos, you know what to do, but doing it in practice is really very, very difficult. And so doing the first mock, getting the feedback, learning from it, doing the second one, getting the feedback, doing the third one, getting that feedback, doing the real exam. By the time you get around to the real exam, your script will be much better. We typically find the marks by the time people get to their third mock really are quite high, whereas the first one was normally, for probably 90% of students, a fail. So the first big lesson here actually is feedback. Getting feedback on your script, doing practice on that really is crucial. So how do we do this then in order to give you the feedback that you require? And also, what can you learn from the feedback that we give you? So the first thing that you'll find is you've got your mark for the various different parts for each particular question. And then in this section here, you'll find a commentary. So on your actual script, your marker will go through giving you marks for each point. So as you make a point that's going to get a mark, they'll say, yep, that's a good point, there's a mark. Or there's an okay point, I give you a half mark. And they'll go through marking your script with marks and half marks so you can see exactly where you're getting marks. And they will put comments on your script as well. So there'll be a lot of feedback on your script, and then in this section there will be a summary of that with all the key lessons to learn. And what I'm most interested in, what you should be most interested in, is not, oh, on that particular question, let's say it was a question on some management accounting theory, absorption costing or something along those lines, activity-based costing. What I'm most interested in is the feedback which is about your general technique, your approach, the way to generally score more marks. Because the reality is, when you've got E2, F2, P2, and actually you could be examined on E1, P1 and F1 as well, there's so much theory that actually, okay, you made a bit of a mistake on activity-based costing. Okay, right, well, you do need to learn that lesson just in case, but the likelihood of activity-based costing or absorption costing coming up in your case study is absolutely tiny. And so those lessons, okay, yeah, good, but the ones to really focus on are the ones where they say, oh, you need to break out your paragraphs more. Or it might be your points need more detailed explanation, or how to get that detailed explanation. Add more value by doing this or doing this or doing this. That's what I really encourage our markers to be, providing that level of feedback. And so those are the things for you to really pick up on. Okay, so you'll see all your different marks, and you then go down the page with lots of different feedback, and then you come down to the actual marks themselves. Now, each of the different sections of the exam, these sections just in here, will relate to one of the competencies. And so here are the different competencies. Now, the first element of passing the exam is passing each of these 4 competencies. It's roughly a third, about 33% that you need in each of those. And so the marks for each section will add up to give you a total mark for each competency, and you need therefore to have gone kind of pass, 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 pass with your 33% for each of those. It's not too, wouldn't worry too much about integration marks as far as that's concerned. But from those you need to go pass, 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 pass all the way along there in order to get an overall pass. Moderate is perfectly fine. So moderate or good really is the passing level. Now, we actually give you a total mark in 2 ways. Firstly, we give you a mark out of 100. This is the way that CIMA do it as well. So we're kind of doing it in the same way, where you should see 60% as being a pass. But of course, in the real exam, you get your marks sort of strangely, bizarrely out of 150. And of course, the reason is that what CIMA do is they take each of the different variants and they say, oh, that was a particularly hard variant. Everyone did badly on that. So what we'll do is we will shift the moderated grade up. So they take whatever the percentage was. Let's say it was 55%. And they say, well, 55% on that really hard variant, that was a pass. So they'll shift that up and then make that 80, which is the pass for out of 150. And then there'll be another one which is a really easy one. Someone may have got 62% and they'll say, yeah, but it was such an easy one, really, that isn't good enough for a pass, and they'll shift that down maybe to 76, something along those lines. So because of that shifting and moderation, you get this moderated grade that takes into account the difficulty of those different variants. And so we give you the moderated grade here as well. Your overall result will come in just here too. So obviously that's the kind of thing that be the thing you're most interested in. But my experience is that there are a lot of students, and I'm thinking almost half students. And what they do is they look at that grade and they go, okay, it was 55%, it was 75 out of 150, I failed. Oh dear, okay, I need to do better next time. And that's it. And yet all of this feedback that we've been giving you, all these lessons to learn, they don't pay that much attention to it. And so my real message to you is that it is in those lessons learned that the key to your success lies. Going through line by line, picking on the feedback, going through your script and learning the lessons there. That's what you need to do differently. But there's one other thing too. You need to go away with those lessons and practice before you do your next mock. One thing I would often suggest to people is to go back, particularly if they've had a particularly bad question, go back and rewrite that question with with all of the lessons that have been applied for you, that have been told for you to apply to that section, actually completed. So do that for each of the each question for your first mock, so that then by the time you get to the second, you've actually practiced doing the right things. So if it's only 50% of people that actually learn from the lessons, actually it'll only be 20% of people that actually do the practice in between. Now my hope is you will be one of those 20%, because it will be those people that really make significant improvements as they go from mock to mock. So as well as each question having feedback, we actually have a section at the end with overall comments. Again, there'll be lots of detailed feedback for you in there on what you need to do better. But there are some other lessons. We don't just stop there. In our feedback, we provide you with an exam technique rating. The idea of this is that you will have gone through these videos, you will have learnt what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing, and the key question is are you doing all those things? Because you know what, there are so many things for you to keep your mind on that it's so hard to do them all, particularly first time out. By the time you get around to your third or fourth practice, you will probably be remembering most of those things. So we are doing this as a reminder. Oh, are you doing this? Are you doing that? For instance, in the area of theory. So let's just highlight that theory there. So in the area of theory, are you showing your knowledge from the E2, P2 and F2 exams? Now, sometimes the questions will be very specific and they will say, you need to use this particular bit of theory. But it may well not be. It may well be that you're asked a question about financial accounting, maybe one of the questions that we were looking at that on the examiner's script that the examiner reviewed related to the concept of provisions. And actually what that particular student had done, they'd gone into, IAS, and actually I forget the number, whichever one it was, that said that, dum. So they'd actually brought that theory in. Quite often if you've got a people skills or leadership type question, you can bring in the E2 management theories and you won't have been told which one to do. So the question is are you demonstrating and bringing that in, even if the question isn't actually telling you that you have to do that. Okay. The other question, of course, is it relevant theory? We know that the examiner does not like irrelevant theory. That's a really key lesson. And so we'll be reviewing that. We'll say, okay, are you using theory where it's appropriate? I'll show you a bit more detail, because actually each of these ratings, this rating of 15 out of 15 over here, is broken down into parts. And so I'll show you how we break that down just very shortly. So the next thing you need to do to have a successful script is you need to analyze. Remember, the examiner wants significant analysis with a bit of theory. It's the analysis that really is critical. It's things like using the pre-scene information from your analysis of that pre-scene. It's information from the industry. It's, have you considered financials, sort of F2, risk, P2 type issues? Have you brought in the new information that you got on the day of the exam that was given to you in the question? Have you related it to that? Have you brought in your industry knowledge, perhaps given industry examples? So what's your broad business awareness like? How are you actually taking the point and applying it to the business in the scenario? You may remember, if you've watched my video, looking at the examiner and what the examiner actually said in terms of giving feedback to students. He was talking about the shipping industry, which was one of the early management case studies, and say, well, not enough people were really applying their answer to that shipping industry. It was almost as if they didn't even know much about the shipping industry. Well, you do need to know that, and so therefore it does need to be logical, it needs to be well thought through and appropriate to the industry. Another element is considering different stakeholders. So as you're analysing an issue, have you considered a wide group of different stakeholders that might be impacted? Let's say we were looking at a simple question: what are the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing? So from that we can say, okay, well, which stakeholders are involved? Well, actually it could be the staff. So some of the staff are going to get perhaps laid off when the outsourcing company take over. Or could we make a recommendation that those staff actually have to go over to the outsourcer as part of the deal? So we're thinking about that. Kind of ethics starts to come into that as well, of course. So you'll notice over here, ethical issues, the culture within the business comes into, the different stakeholders as part of this section. And it's very important, because people and leadership skills are two key criteria that you're being measured on, and so therefore thinking as you go through your script about people and management, and actually of course we have leadership down here as the next one, so I'll come on to that there, but it's the people side that really is critical here. So how will outsourcing affect the shareholders? Well, they're mostly interested in more profits, and so the question is are we going to cut costs? And if so, is it going to make the business more efficient and better and still achieve the quality for customers? And there's another stakeholder. So you see that through different stakeholders, if as you're thinking through your answer to a question, you just go through in your mind, right, which stakeholders are affected, you will start to get a lot more detail. In fact, you will start to analyze the issue in a lot more depth. There'll be a lot of people on that question that will just go through, okay, I've learned a list of outsourcing advantages and disadvantages, or I may not have even learnt it, but I kind of know it. It's on the sort of tip of my tongue, as it were. And they'll just write that out, and they won't relate it to the scenario. They won't think about the different stakeholders that are affected. They won't analyse it in terms of those stakeholders. So the question is, are you? Because your analysis will be much better if it is. Now, as far as leadership is concerned, we know from the examiner's real focus on this in the script review that he did, was that he really wants you to make clear recommendations after you've done your analysis. You've done your pros, you've done your cons, all about outsourcing, and then you say, and my recommendation is this. It needs to be assertive, clear, consider the team and the management aspects of the issue, bringing in again the stakeholders. So are you making those recommendations the examiner wants you to? You must do that. Of course, we have a whole leadership criteria, which is, on which you're being graded, which is why we review whether you're doing the leadership side of things. Finally, we review your planning and your writing style. So are you doing things like lots of headings, using short paragraphs, a reasonably long answer, i.e. are there enough points to pass, are you answering the specific requirement asked, and so on. Okay, nice balanced script, answering all the different parts of each of the questions. And so we will go through and grade you on those criteria. And you'll see actually as we go through, here you'll see your total score. So your goal, of course, would be to take this total score here and improve that from mock to mock to mock to show you're doing all the right things required to pass. Now notice that 100 does not directly relate to your final mark. Okay, that is for the points that you make. This is an exam technique score. Now, typically, the higher your exam technique score, the higher the actual mark you will get. But of course, they are looking at slightly different things. Okay, so aim for that to go up as we go through. So then we break it down and give you feedback. So the first of our categories that we mentioned earlier was theory. And then we break down our feedback and say, well, how well have you done? We give you a rating out of 5. Okay, this one is the top rating. And a top rating would be regular reference to technical theory and ideas throughout the paper, the level about right. So reference to, not lots of detailed description of, I think is the key lesson in there. Okay. In fact, our next criteria relates to that description of the theory, which is it should be an introduction of that theory. Okay. Don't assume your recipient knows the theory. They probably won't, or even if they did, if you imagine a couple of years' time, you probably forgot most of the theory you're learning as part of your CIMA studies. So even if you're writing to a qualified accountant, they've probably forgotten it, and a bit of a reminder wouldn't do them any harm. But that's what it is. This is not a theoretical exam. Limited marks available for description of theory. So again, it's about getting the balance right, explaining it in about a paragraph, then moving on and analysing. Finally, it's the relevance of the theory. Only relevant theory will gain marks. And so are you picking up the right theory in the right ways? We will tell you on which theory you were technically strong and which ones you were actually weaker, of the ones that were either asked for in the exam or which you used in the exam, and suggest some other theories which you potentially could have used to have helped you. Again, to help you just master that theory section. Okay, at the bottom is your total rating. You can see that total rating of 15 would relate back, if we just skim back up, to the rating of 15 up here at the top that we've already highlighted just here. So you can see that the later sheets link back to this total summary sheet. So the next of our sections then is on analysis. The first element of analysis is saying that simply, are you actually applying theory to the scenarios? Is there application in there, or are you just focusing too much on the theory? Then we start to look at the different things you should be analysing. So, are you analysing and relating your point to the business strategy? As part of your general analysis of the pre-scene, you will have done, or you would have seen our one that was done for you, a SWOT analysis, a PESTEL analysis, a 5 forces analysis. You would have thought about their generic strategy. Are they a cost leader or a differentiator? Are they focused, like narrow or wide? You would have analysed the business strategy. And so the question is as you're making a recommendation, is it consistent with their strategic direction? Is it consistent? Will it capitalise on their strengths, deal with the weaknesses, take the opportunities and deal with the threats that you decided as part of your early analysis? So are you thinking about it as logical for the business? The next element is to think about it from, have you considered the financial impacts? Actually, if we just take the example that I was talking about earlier, which is the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing, we will then consider how consistent is that with the business strategy. Perhaps we identified that particular department as a weakness, and therefore it would overcome that weakness, and it would therefore improve maybe the quality of the products that we produce, and from that it helps customers, which is consistent with our strategic direction. But then we must consider the costs of that outsourcing. Also, where's the money going to come from to pay that outsourcer? So we're considering finance. Then we consider risk. So what could go wrong? So what would be, what happens if that outsourcer goes bust or out of business and they can't provide their service? What if the quality isn't what we were expecting to be? How do we retain, ensure and manage their quality now they're not within the business? So considering risk and the things that could go wrong as part of your analysis comes in there. And then we've got, are you bringing in your industry knowledge and use of examples? Perhaps as part of your research you came across an example of a company that had outsourced and you could give that an example. One thing I will always say with that example is make sure you don't just give the example, but you say how it relates to the question asked. When I was when I spoke to the examiner at the CIMA conference, I specifically asked him about this particular question. I wanted to know his view on industry examples, and yes, he liked the use of industry examples, but the key was demonstrate how it's answering the question. So if your example of outsourcing was a success for that business, you can say, well, such and such a company, they successfully used it and saved themselves £100 million. We could use this similar strategy to help save us money. So it's that conclusion coming from it that makes a big difference. The next section is stakeholders. Of course, I've already been through a little example of this when we were going through earlier. Again, we could consider a range of different stakeholders when we're considering that outsourcing question. Are you always considering all the key stakeholders? It doesn't have to be every single one of those different stakeholders. I mean, here they all are, a big list of different stakeholders you consider. It doesn't have to be everyone, but are you considering the key ones when you're analysing your issues? Have you thought about the current culture and the current structure of the business? Outsourcing actually would change the structure by taking a part of the business which is within the structure and throwing it outside the structure. Then you have to ask yourself, how would it affect the culture? How would it affect the way our staff are and behave by bringing in this external company? I don't know, perhaps we're outsourcing the whole IT department or something like that. Well, how's that going to change the way we feel when everyone's phoning up this external company and we've lost a big internal group? If they're a particularly important group that are really critical to the culture of the business, that might not be something we want to go ahead with. And finally, the ethical issues, the CSR issues, and of course the example I gave you of that one earlier on outsourcing is, are we considering our staff and just having to lay off all those staff and the impact of those staff? And perhaps, as I said before, the solution might be to force the outsourcer to employ those people as part of the contract. But there's very often, even when you're not asked a specific ethics question, you're just analysing an issue. You can see my question was, what are the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing? And yet I've been able to talk about an ethics issue. I've been able to think about how it affects the culture and the structure. I've been able to consider different stakeholders. So you can see how, I mean, actually I've also been able to think about industry examples, the financial risk impacts. I've been able to think about the strategic. So you can see this is like a checklist of points. Now, of course, as part of my planning video, I show you how to make sure you go through that checklist when you are doing your plan. But really what this is doing is just saying, are you doing all of those different things? And so we'll give you some feedback on where your strengths and weaknesses are. Of course, your goal is that if you know, maybe you get a rating of 2 here, and basically nowhere in your answer are you considering cultural issues, then for next time round, that's, oh yeah, look, I keep on forgetting culture. I must remember to just analyse cultural issues when the time comes up. Okay. So as part of leadership then, one key element of that is the way you are communicating your point. So are points made clear at the right level? Does it come across as professional? So we're going to sort of talk about how your communication is. Nice, clear, bold recommendations, already spoken about what the examiner definitely wants that. Another little tip for you that we've just got as part of our description here is how you can often make sub-recommendations. The particular example here is, yep, I think we should go ahead with the takeover. And actually what you could do is you could say, well, it's not quite as simple as that. Normally, if you're going to take over a business, you will do due diligence first. That is, you will go in, or actually probably you'll get an external firm of accountants to go in and look at that target company and look at what's good or bad about them. Are the numbers on their statement of financial position as they say they are? Are they correct? So you'll do that due diligence first. And if no issues come from that, then you'll actually go on and make an offer, and perhaps you could suggest how much that offer would be worth because you've done a valuation as part of your analysis. Or maybe the current share price, it says in the question, is £9 per share, and so obviously you need to offer more than that because you have to convince people to go above the market rate in order to convince enough people to sell to you. Okay, and maybe in this particular case we need to then have a change management strategy once we've actually bought that. So can you see the level of quality of an answer that in 2 lines there has considered those 4 issues rather than just go ahead with the takeover? And that's what makes a really good recommendation. Okay, so it's clear, but it's also detailed in terms of what you want. Then there's the why. Have you said why we actually must do this? We would do this takeover because it will give a good financial return. It will ensure the quality of our supply is higher in the future. We've got the cash available, so therefore, we should just be investing cash that we've got, and this looks like a good valued investment. Those kind of justifications show that the quality of your recommendation is good. Finally, because of the people and the leadership elements, the key criteria are change management and motivation as part of those competencies. And so have you considered staff issues and how we will make the change actually happen? You could bring in theories such as Maslow's hierarchy of needs or Hertzberg's motivation theories, Lewin's force field analysis to help support that. You don't have to, but they can be useful models to help support any motivation issues. So have you considered the effects on staff motivation and how we make the change actually happen? Okay, finally, but actually potentially, the one that's got the most points of rating on is planning and technique. So have you done a plan? Is there a clear structure to what you do? There's evidence of planning. That doesn't mean that we can actually see your plan, but it just looks well planned and well structured and well thought through. Have you completed all the sections of the script with good time management? Or is it that you're doing like part A really well and then part B you're kind of running out of time? Again, we can't always know what you've done, but we give our judgment about whether, very often you can see it just because of shorter later answers or less detail, or it just looks rushed and there's no structure to the later answers. Are you addressing the requirement? Do you know what? Of all of the things that you need to do well, that 5 marks there is probably more important than any of the others, because if you are always addressing the requirement on every single point you make, you will be answering the question and then you will be scoring good marks. Okay, and again, we'll be telling you whether you're doing that or not. Are you using headings? Okay, not just headings for each section, like we've got section A and section B, but all the subparts as well. On that outsourcing question, I'd like to see a heading for each of the different benefits. So if my first benefit is expertise, I'd have expertise, and then I'd have a paragraph of 4 or 5 lines explaining that. And then I'd go on. Each of those subpoints would have a heading. Again, if you're doing that, lots of headings, we'll be giving you a 5 mark there. Nice brief paragraphs, 4 to 6 lines. If you're doing that all the way through, again, 5 marks there. And are you writing enough points? If your answers are too short, you're just not going to be passing. And again, we give you that breakdown there. A 30-mark question would be, well, about 24 is what most people will be going for, and that's okay. If you can get it up to 30, which is where the prize winners are, you're in a really strong position because there's just more points to mark. You've made more points, and so remember, as the examiner says, it is quality, not quantity, but if you get quality and quantity, you will be scoring more marks overall. Okay, so 30 marks in total there. So that all sums up then to the total, which then comes out of 100. Let's whip back and see that. So here's your exam technique rating. If you, on your first time round, you're doing all those things, you really will be a miracle worker, because can you see there's so many things there for you to consider. Okay, you're not going to get that first time round. This is why so many people fail their first mock. But by the time you're on your 3rd one, or if you start redoing the mocks, then you will get the hang of this and you'll get these things in. And if you're doing all these things, if you will be doing well. Okay, the only thing that might let you down at this stage is you just don't have enough technical knowledge, so you're just not getting the technical elements right. And so, you know, that would be the last thing. Although all that's sort of covered here in theory here, but yeah, to me, you could be scoring very, very highly on exam technique, but just not know the theory, and then you don't do too well. Okay, so that would be the only thing. That would be the only reason why you have a high mark here and still not pass. So really focus on your exam technique rating. In summary, then, as you can see, the feedback we give is very, very detailed, and it shows you exactly what you need to do to pass. And so please do learn from that feedback. Please do practice what those lessons are in between mocks, and then learn from first mock to second mock to third mock to the real exam. If you do that, you'll put yourself really in an excellent position to pass this exam.